Maya Williams had never been fond of new beginnings. With her family constantly moving due to her mother's work, Maya was no stranger to the unsettling feeling of being the new girl in school. This time, however, it was different. She was starting her senior year at Clearview High School in Houston, Texas, and Maya had made a silent vow to herself. She would keep her head down, stay unnoticed, and focus solely on the finish line. The transition from one high school to another, each with its own rules and social structures, had become too much of a routine, a cycle she wished to break free from. As Maya stepped off the school bus, the heavy weight of her backpack felt like a physical burden. She adjusted the straps, keeping her gaze firmly on the ground, avoiding the curious eyes of the students already gathered by the main entrance. The crisp autumn air brushed against her skin, the scent of freshly cut grass and warm pavement filling the air. Despite the warm greetings and casual chatter around her, Maya felt like an outsider in this sea of unfamiliar faces. She had mastered the art of blending in, of being invisible, a technique she had perfected over the years. Clearview High wasn't anything particularly special, not in Maya's eyes. It was one of those large suburban schools, filled with mostly middle-class kids who had known each other since kindergarten. The football team was decent, the cheerleaders were popular, and the social hierarchy had long been established. Everyone had their place. Maya's place, she figured, was at the bottom of the social ladder, an anonymous existence where no one paid much attention to her. Her goal was simple: stay invisible, stay out of trouble, and make it through the year. She walked into the school, her footsteps quick and purposeful as she made her way to the hallway. The clamor of lockers slamming and sneakers squeaking on the tile floor surrounded her, but Maya didn't flinch. The bustle of students and teachers trying to herd them into classrooms was almost soothing. She had seen it all before: high school drama, cliques, the popularity contests that meant nothing outside these walls. Maya was an observer, always on the outside looking in. As she approached her locker, she felt the usual mix of apprehension and resignation. Another new school, another set of unfamiliar faces. She had mastered the art of avoidance, learned how to dodge unwanted attention, and steer clear of the loud personalities who often made her feel small. Maya had learned the hard way that people like her didn't stand a chance in places like this unless they played by the unspoken rules. And Maya had no intention of playing. With her books stacked neatly in her arms, Maya made her way to her first class, trying not to notice the whispers or the occasional glance her way. The students here were mostly friendly, but she knew better than to expect too much. They were either too busy with their own lives to care, or simply too polite to be rude. Either way, she didn't mind. Maya had grown used to being a ghost in the halls of her schools, a shadow that passed unnoticed. It was safer that way. But then she saw him. Bryce Carter stood at the center of the hallway, leaning casually against a row of lockers. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and exuded an aura of effortless confidence that only the most popular students seemed to possess. Bryce was the kind of guy who seemed to own the school, and everyone knew it. He was the star quarterback, the golden boy, with good looks and a family that had more money than most of the students in this school could ever dream of. His friends, all wearing Letterman jackets, surrounded him, laughing at something he had just said. They were practically hanging on his every word, trying to impress him, to be in his good graces. Maya, however, saw him for what he truly was. She had encountered people like Bryce before, the ones who thrived on power, intimidation, and control. They fed off the fear they instilled in others, relishing the discomfort they caused. Maya had learned how to avoid them, to keep her distance, but she couldn't help but notice how effortlessly Bryce commanded attention. He didn't just walk through the halls, he owned them. As Maya continued to walk, her eyes briefly flicked toward him, and she felt it, the familiar sense of being on the outside looking in. She could already tell that Bryce wasn't just popular, he was untouchable. He was the kind of person who made others fear him without saying a word. His confidence was his armor, and no one dared challenge it. But Maya didn't care. She wasn't here to make friends. She wasn't here to be part of the in crowd. All she wanted was to get through the year without drawing attention to herself. She kept walking, trying not to attract Bryce's gaze, knowing that people like him didn't waste time with people like her. She wasn't even on his radar, at least not yet. Maya kept her head down in class, the school day passed, answering only when necessary and avoiding eye contact whenever possible. During lunch, she found a quiet corner of the cafeteria, sitting by herself with her tray of food. The hum of voices around her was almost soothing, and she let herself relax for a moment. She didn't mind eating alone. In fact, it was preferable. It meant she wouldn't have to worry about small talk or making conversation with people she barely knew. Bryce, on the other hand, was impossible to ignore. He sat at the center of the cafeteria, surrounded by his group of friends, all of them laughing loudly and dominating the conversation. It was clear that they were the kings of this place. The way everyone around them catered to their every word, the way people moved aside to let them pass, it was as if they were untouchable. Maya couldn't help but watch them for a moment, observing how they carried themselves with such arrogance. She knew their type, the ones who thought they could control everything and everyone around them. But Maya wasn't impressed. In fact, she found their behavior a little ridiculous. The world didn't revolve around them, even if they thought it did. As the lunch period drew to a close, Maya made her way to her next class, determined to stay out of the way, to avoid drawing attention to herself. But as she passed through the crowded hallway, she felt it. The tension, the subtle shift in the air. Bryce and his friends were behind her now, and she could feel their eyes on her. She knew what was coming. Sure enough, she felt a sharp bump against her shoulder, one that wasn't accidental. Her books tumbled to the ground, scattering across the floor. A few students turned to look, some snickering quietly. Maya bent down to pick them up, trying to ignore the burning in her cheeks. She had been in this situation before, and she knew exactly how to handle it. "Hey, new girl," a voice called out behind her. Maya didn't need to look up to know who it was. It was Bryce. His voice was calm, almost amused, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. He was toying with her, playing a game. Maya straightened up slowly, clutching her books. She didn't say a word as she walked past him, but Bryce wasn't done yet. "Where's your manners?" he called out, his voice carrying through the hallway. Maya didn't answer. She just kept walking, refusing to engage with him. She had played this game before, and she knew how to win. But Bryce wasn't used to being ignored, especially not by someone like her. He was used to people either laughing at his jokes or fearing him. And when Maya didn't flinch, when she didn't cower, it unsettled him. That's when it happened. Bryce tugged on her backpack, pulling her back just enough to let her know that he wasn't going to let this go. Maya stopped, slowly turning around to face him. For a moment, the hallway felt silent. The students who had been minding their own business now turned to watch. Bryce stood in front of her, arms crossed, a smirk still on his face. But there was something different in his eyes, a flicker of curiosity, perhaps even a touch of uncertainty. "You shouldn't have done that," Maya said quietly, her voice low but firm. Bryce raised an eyebrow, almost laughing. "Oh yeah? And why is that?" Maya didn't respond right away. Instead, she met his gaze, unflinching. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't intimidated. And that, more than anything, was what caught Bryce off guard. For the first time, he wasn't the one in control, and Maya wasn't going to make it easy for him to take it back. The rest of the school day passed in a blur for Maya. After the brief exchange with Bryce in the hallway, she felt the weight of his gaze on her throughout the day. But she didn't let it bother her. She had learned long ago that people like Bryce Carter thrived on reactions. They thrived on fear, on seeing others bend to their will. Maya knew she couldn't give him that satisfaction. As the bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, Maya gathered her things and headed for the exit. Her heart was still racing from the encounter, but she kept her head down, determined to stay unnoticed. The school was still buzzing with energy, students laughing, talking, rushing to their cars and buses, but Maya walked through it like a shadow, blending in with the crowd. But just as she reached for her phone, ready to text her friend back home, she heard the familiar voice behind her. "Hey, new girl," Bryce called out, his tone mocking. Maya turned slowly, knowing exactly what was coming. Bryce was standing there with a smug grin on his face, arms casually resting in his pockets. Behind him, a few of his friends lingered, but there was no laughter this time, no jeering. They were all waiting for Maya's response. Maya didn't flinch. She turned to face him fully, arms crossed, and met his gaze without hesitation, trying to keep the irritation from her voice. Bryce took a slow step forward, his confidence radiating from him like an aura. "You got an attitude problem," he said, his smirk widening. He wasn't going to let this go. He was determined to get a reaction from her. "You think you're better than me?" Maya let out a short laugh, the sound coming out far more confidently than she intended. "Not at all," she said with a shrug. "I just think you should walk away." There it was, the silence that followed her words. For the first time, Bryce's face faltered. He wasn't sure how to respond to someone who didn't fear him, didn't crumble under his usual intimidation. He took another step forward, trying to regain control of the situation. "What makes you think you can talk to me like that?" he asked, his voice lowering slightly, as if challenging her to back down. Maya raised an eyebrow. "Because you're nothing to me," she said, her voice calm but unwavering. "You don't scare me, and you're not even worth my time." Bryce's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing as the one who ruled the halls of Clearview High. But Maya wasn't playing his game. She wasn't intimidated by his power or his status, and that, more than anything, unsettled him. For the first time, he wasn't the one calling the shots, and it drove him crazy. Maya turned away from him, not waiting for his response, and walked toward the bus stop. But even as she walked away, she could feel Bryce's eyes on her, and she knew he wasn't done with her yet. He would try again. He always did. The next morning, Maya walked into school with a sense of calm that surprised even herself. She had expected the usual whispers, the stares, the occasional cruel comment. But when she entered the hallway, something was different. The whispers were still there, but they weren't about her. People were talking about Bryce. Her mind was focused, her steps quick, and she moved through the hallways with ease. But in the back of her mind, she could feel the shift. Bryce wasn't the one in control anymore. As she walked past a group of students, she overheard snippets of conversation. "Did you see Bryce's locker?" one girl whispered. "The new girl totally owned him yesterday," another said. "Bryce hasn't been the same since she stood up to him." Maya couldn't help but smile to herself. She had seen it in Bryce's eyes the day before. He had underestimated her, and now he was paying the price for it. The more people talked about her, the less power he had. People were questioning his authority, his dominance. They were starting to see him for what he really was. Just another bully trying to hold on to control in a world that was changing around him. When Maya entered the cafeteria that day, she wasn't surprised to see Bryce sitting at his usual table with his friends. His smirk was gone. The confidence he usually carried so effortlessly had been replaced with an edge of uncertainty. The way he looked at her across the room was different this time. He wasn't mocking her anymore. He was watching her, trying to figure out what made her so unbothered by him. Maya grabbed her tray and walked to her usual seat, but Bryce wasn't finished. He called out to her, his voice loud and confident, like he was trying to regain control of the situation. "Hey, Maya, you still crying about your locker yesterday?" he shouted, his friends laughing along with him, as if they were trying to regain the power they had lost. Maya didn't flinch. She didn't even look at him. She kept walking toward her seat, ignoring his taunts. But Bryce wasn't going to let it slide. "Guess you can't handle it, huh? Maybe your big bad daddy should come fight your battles for you," he called out again, louder this time. A few students giggled, but Maya wasn't fazed. Her mind raced with the memory of the car ride with Vin the night before. She could feel the power in his words, in the way he carried himself. Bryce, on the other hand, was nothing more than a boy desperately trying to hold on to a power he didn't have anymore. Maya stopped in her tracks and turned toward him, her voice calm and steady. "It's funny," she said, a hint of amusement in her voice. "You keep bringing up my dad, like you're not the one who almost pissed himself when he saw him." The cafeteria went silent. Bryce's face tightened, his friends falling quiet as they glanced at him nervously. The confidence that had once defined him was crumbling. Maya continued, "I think you're scared, Bryce. Scared of being irrelevant. Scared of losing control." Bryce's smirk faltered, and for the first time, Maya saw the doubt in his eyes. His jaw clenched, his fist curled, but he didn't say anything. Maya turned and walked past him, sitting down at her usual spot in the cafeteria, her heart pounding with the knowledge that she had just flipped the script. Bryce wasn't the one in control anymore, By the end of the day, Maya had learned that Bryce Carter was the kind of person who didn't take defeat well. But she was ready for him. She knew what to expect. And when she found her locker trashed, with her books scattered across the floor and hateful words scribbled on the metal, she didn't react. Instead, she bent down, picking up her books one by one, her expression calm. She didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her anger, and it unnerved him. Maya knew this game wasn't over yet, but she was patient. Bryce was making mistakes, and soon he would have no choice but to confront the truth. The next morning, the tension at Clearview High was palpable. As Maya stepped into the school, she could feel the eyes of students on her, some curious, some sympathetic, and some downright judgmental. She could hear the murmurs, the whispers, and the collective buzz about the locker incident from the day before. But this time, something had shifted. The whispers weren't about her, they were Hall's. Not because she didn't notice the attention, but because she didn't care. Maya had learned early in life that control over her emotions was the key to making others lose theirs. And Bryce Carter, the king of Clearview High, was on the verge of losing control. She passed by the jocks table in the cafeteria, where Bryce was already sitting with his usual crowd. But something was different today. The group was quieter, the usual laughter and banter subdued. Bryce was no longer the confident bully at the center of attention. Now his friends were looking at him with uncertain eyes, watching him more than he was watching them. Maya didn't even need to glance at him. She already knew. Bryce's grip on his popularity, his authority, and his reputation was slipping, and it terrified him. As Maya walked to her usual seat, she could feel the subtle shift in the atmosphere. The students around her, some of whom had previously avoided looking her way, were now looking at her with a mix of admiration and awe. She had stood up to Bryce, the invincible bully, without flinching. She had turned the tables, made him look small, and in doing so, she had exposed the cracks in his carefully constructed facade. The cafeteria was quieter than usual. The clicks of trays and the rustle of paper were the only sounds as Maya sat down. Bryce was still staring at her, but now his gaze was no longer filled with mockery. There was something else, something Maya hadn't expected: fear. Maya didn't make a scene. She didn't retaliate or escalate the situation. She simply sat down, opened her lunch, and ate. But even in the silence, she could sense the unease around her. Bryce had lost his power. By lunchtime, the buzz around school had grown even louder. Bryce's locker wasn't the only thing that had been targeted. The whispers had now shifted toward him. His reputation was taking a hit, and people were starting to notice. Bryce Carter, the golden boy, the football star, had been knocked off his pedestal. But Maya wasn't done. She knew that Bryce wasn't the type to back down quietly. He would strike back, but Maya had learned long ago that sometimes the best way to handle a bully was to let them dig their own grave. Bryce was making all the wrong moves, and Maya was letting him make them. He was pushing harder than ever, trying to regain the power he thought he still had. But with every attempt, he was revealing more of his true character to everyone around him. The tension reached its peak when, after school, Maya was walking toward the parking lot when she saw him. Bryce was leaning against his car, arms crossed, his usual smug grin nowhere to be found. This time he was alone, his friends nowhere in sight. It was just him, standing there trying to regain control of a situation that had long since slipped through his fingers. Maya slowed her pace, sensing the shift in energy. She wasn't surprised. She knew it was only a matter of time before he came after her again. But this time, she wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. She stopped a few feet away from him, standing tall, arms crossed. "What do you want, Bryce?" she asked, her voice calm but unwavering. He studied her for a moment, his eyes searching for a chink in her armor. But Maya didn't flinch. She had been through too much to let someone like him intimidate her now. "I just want to know why you're acting like you own this school," he said, his voice low. "What's your deal, huh?" Maya tilted her head slightly, looking at him with a mixture of curiosity and amusement. "What makes you think I'm the one acting like I own anything?" she asked. "You've been running the school for a while, haven't you? But you know what? I don't care about your little kingdom. I don't need to be in control to be happy." Bryce's jaw clenched. "You don't get it, do you? People like me, we run things. People like you don't get to come in here and change everything. You don't belong." Maya shook her head, her lips curling into a small, confident smile. You're right about one thing, Bryce. People like you push and push until people like me have no choice but to push back. But I didn't push back, did I? She asked, her voice steady. No, I waited. I waited for you to make a mistake. And you did. Bryce's eyes flickered with uncertainty for the briefest moment, but he quickly masked it with arrogance. What's your point, Maya? My point is, she said slowly, taking a step closer, that you're just digging yourself deeper, Bryce. The more you try to push me, the more you expose your own weaknesses. People see it now. They see you for who you really are. Bryce clenched his fists, his anger rising, but Maya didn't back down. She stood her ground, her voice firm and unwavering. You think I'm scared of you? That I'm going to back down? You've been the bully, the big shot, guy who's afraid to lose his grip on control. And that fear is what's going to ruin you. Bryce's face reddened, and for a second, Maya thought he might snap. His hands trembled, his body rigid with frustration. But then, as if realizing the futility of it all, he took a deep breath and stepped back. Whatever, he muttered under his breath, turning away. You think you've won? Fine. Enjoy it while it lasts. As Bryce stormed off, Maya stood there for a moment, watching him go. She knew this wasn't over yet. Bryce wouldn't let it go so easily. But what he didn't realize was that every move he made was only going to make his downfall inevitable. Maya wasn't done with him, but she wasn't going to stoop to his level either. She would let him make all the mistakes, expose himself for the bully he truly was. And when the time was right, she would make sure everyone else saw it too. That evening, as Maya sat at the kitchen table with Vin Diesel, she couldn't shake the feeling that the battle with Bryce had only just begun. But there was something in the way she carried herself now. Something different. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. Vin studied her closely, his usual calm expression replaced with a quiet pride. So what's next? He asked, his voice steady, but there was a hint of curiosity in his eyes. Maya smiled, the confidence in her voice unmistakable. Now I wait. Let him make all the wrong moves. I'll be ready when it's time. Vin's lips curled into a smirk. That's my girl. The days following the encounter with Bryce were filled with whispers, tension, and an unsettling anticipation. Maya could feel the air shift in Clearview High. The school, once Bryce's domain, was no longer the same. Bryce Carter, once the king of the school, was now a man on the edge, grasping desperately to maintain the control he had so effortlessly wielded before. But now Maya was the one who was in control, and she knew how to play the game. It didn't take long for Bryce to realize that he had underestimated Maya in the worst possible way. He had thought she was an easy target, someone to push around, someone who wouldn't stand up for herself. But the more he tried to push her, the more he saw her unwavering strength and resolve, and that terrified him. Maya, on the other hand, kept her cool. She knew that Bryce was just another bully who thrived on fear and intimidation. She also knew that fear was a double-edged sword. It could either control people or drive them to their breaking point. Maya wasn't afraid. She wasn't going to let Bryce break her, and she wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Instead, she let him dig his own grave, watching as his actions began to unravel his carefully constructed image. The whispers around school began to change. People started to talk about Bryce's locker incident and his behavior toward Maya. What was once an unshakable reputation started to crumble, and Maya didn't have to lift a finger to make it happen. Bryce was digging his own grave, and everyone could see it. Then on the third day after the cafeteria incident, things took a dramatic turn. The school was buzzing with excitement, but not for the reasons Bryce had hoped. Bryce had become the subject of gossip, but not in the way he expected. He had pushed too hard, and the consequences were finally catching up to him. Maya had been walking through the halls, her head held high, when she heard the familiar hum of the crowd behind her. This time it wasn't the usual whispers of curiosity or amusement. It was the sound of judgment, of something darker creeping in. She turned a corner and saw what had happened. Bryce's locker was completely covered in printed screenshots and text messages. Messages that Bryce had thought were private, cruel jokes and insults aimed at various students and even teachers. But now, they were all out in the open for everyone to see. The room was silent as students gathered around the locker, staring at the scandalous messages, and then at Bryce, who had just arrived to witness the destruction of his reputation. Bryce's face turned pale as his eyes scanned the messages. His confident demeanor shattered in an instant. "What the hell is this?" Bryce spat, his voice shaking with anger. His hands trembled as he ripped the papers off the locker, but the damage was already done. The whispers were growing louder, and the looks of disgust from the other students were impossible to ignore. Maya watched from the hallway, her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. She had already seen this coming. Bryce had thought he could humiliate her, but in doing so, he had exposed his own cruelty and weaknesses. Now he was standing in the middle of the school, unable to stop the tidal wave of consequences, Bryce muttered to himself, trying to piece together what had happened. But deep down, he knew he was losing control. The whispers had grown louder, and Maya, the quiet girl who had once been nothing more than an easy target, was now the one everyone was talking about. She had taken down the bully, and he couldn't handle it. Maya stood in the background, her gaze steady. She had been waiting for this moment. She had played her cards carefully, knowing that the longer Bryce tried to hold on to his false sense of power, the more he would expose himself. And now, standing before her, was the result of that strategy. Bryce's eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time since Maya had arrived at Clearview High, there was no smug smirk on his face. There was no arrogance, no superiority. There was only rage, and it was directed at Maya. "You did this, didn't you?" he hissed, his voice full of venom. "You think you've won?" Maya took a slow step forward, her voice calm and collected. "Did I? Or did you do this to yourself?" Bryce's fists clenched, and for a second Maya thought he might snap. But instead he turned away, his anger giving way to frustration. He wasn't done yet. He wasn't going to let it end like this. But Maya wasn't finished either. She watched as he stormed off, his shoulders stiff with rage, his pride wounded. The crowd dispersed, and the hallway fell silent once more. Maya knew this wasn't over, but she also knew that Bryce's reign of terror was over. His reputation had been destroyed, and the once mighty bully was no longer the king of Clearview High. Later that day, as Maya left school, she found Vin Diesel waiting for her in the sleek black Charger. He leaned casually against the car, his eyes studying her with a quiet pride. As she slid into the passenger seat, she exhaled a deep breath, feeling the weight lift off her shoulders. "Well, it's done," she said quietly, looking out the window. Vin turned the key in the ignition, his smile faint but proud. "That's my girl," he said, his voice calm and approving. Maya leaned back in her seat, feeling the adrenaline of the day slowly fade. She had done it. She had beaten the bully without ever having to lower herself to his level. And in doing so, she had exposed the truth about him for everyone to see. As they drove through the streets of Houston, Maya allowed herself to relax. She had won. But more than that, she had proven to herself that she didn't need to be the loudest, the strongest, or the most ruthless. She had outsmarted Bryce and in the process had earned the respect of everyone around her. But even as the tension faded, Maya knew that Bryce wasn't finished. Bullies like him didn't give up easily. But this time, it didn't matter. Bryce had already lost. He had been outplayed, and the whispers about his downfall were only growing louder. Maya leaned back against the headrest, smiling to herself. She wasn't just the girl who survived high school. She was the one who had turned the tables and won, all on her own terms. And that, more than anything, was what made this victory so sweet. Emily Taus was no stranger to struggle. The loud blare of her alarm clock at 5 a.m. pierced through the stillness of her modest studio apartment in Queens, the only sound that could break the quiet night. As she groggily reached for the clock, her tired eyes skimmed the cracked ceiling above, a constant reminder of her life, one that felt stagnant, almost like the peeling paint on the walls. Shadows danced from the streetlights outside, almost as if ghosts were visiting, their fleeting presence reminding her that life had never really felt like hers. Exhaling deeply, Emily forced herself to get out of bed. The same routine, the same struggles, but today, like every day, she whispered her grandmother's mantra in both Spanish and English. One step forward, one day at a time. Despite everything, her worn-out apartment, the ice-cold water in the bathroom, the crumbling life she tried so hard to piece together, she believed just one step forward. By 6:30 a.m., she was clocking in at the Atoria Grand Hotel, a grand five-star luxury establishment in Manhattan's Upper East Side. A place that felt so out of reach, yet Emily found herself cleaning its floors day after day. Her name tag read, Housekeeping Emily, a title she had come to accept without question. Today, she would clean the fifth-floor rooms, the hallways, the executive lounge. If the breakfast buffet was short-staffed, she would help there too. She moved fast, focused, and invisible, just the way they liked her. But Emily wasn't who she seemed. Beneath her humble job was a mind that had spent years working hard to earn a degree in foreign languages from Hunter College. She was at the top of her class, with honors,